Awards and other veteran shows, or is a Toronto-based entertainment industry executive. For 30 years, he's avoided being on a stage and spends his free time searching through old publications for curious baseball stories. He still has dreams of owning an independent baseball team.
I'm going to change that introduction.
Years. I may have to use this page down.
Okay, yeah. So this is all about 1970s Montreal. Is anybody there? Sherbrooke doesn't count. So 1970s international baseball was a very fractured group. The European countries felt they weren't getting any respect and were being excluded from decisions. The president of the Italian Federation was named Bruno Benick. He was very vocal about South American federations not allowing Europeans into key positions. The president of the Belgian Federation said it was only ever about the Caribbean at FIBA, Cuba being the spokesperson. So in 1973, 24 nations created something called FEMBA, which was an acronym for Federación Mundial, sorry, my Spanish, de Baseball Amateur, and they sponsored a few events, and they created something called the Intercontinental Cup. The Italian president immediately jumped on it and organized a tournament in Italy called the Intercontinental Cup. It was considered an international amateur world championship. Japan won that tournament rather easily. Canada came fourth, for what it's worth. Cuba didn't attend. So this was the first announcement of the Intercontinental Cup. In Canada, there was a contingent there in Italy, and they really liked what they saw. And these officials, led by Edmonton City Councillor and 2006 Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame inductee Ron Hayter, they applied for rights to host the next Intercontinental Cup, and that was scheduled for 1975. Immediately, their request was granted. And the president of the Canadian Federation of Amateur Baseball was a guy named Jean-Robert Nollet, and he requested the Quebec Amateur Federation and the New Brunswick Amateur Federation organize the tournament. Baseball at the time was experiencing a very rapid growth in those two provinces, mostly because of the Expos starting in 1969. When the Expos started, there was 45,000 registered players in Quebec. That number went up to 75,000 in the first 4 or 5 years. Similar progress had been seen in New Brunswick. So those two provinces were chosen. The Intercontinental Cup Corporation was formed. That body negotiated with federal and provincial governments and approached Canadian businesses to organize financial support for the tournament. The president of the corporation was Wallace McCain, president of McCain Foods, who was active in supporting baseball, hockey, and golf associations. The city of Moncton agreed to, they had a stadium called Kiwanis Park Stadium. They agreed to spend $134,000 to recruit the stadium. In fact, they spent over $200,000, and they turned Kiwanis Park into what was called a really good AA stadium. It held 3,500 people. The Montreal Expos agreed to have Jerry Park available for the tournament, and both Moncton and the Expos provided their stadiums for free. The games were to be played the 14th to 21st of August in Moncton and 22nd to 31st in Montreal. So things were getting going for the 75 tournament. It was decided that the top 6 teams from the 73 tournament automatically were invited, and that was Japan, Puerto Rico, USA, Nicaragua, Canada, and Italy. And they were going to be joined by 2 more teams, Cuba and South Korea. And they were going to play a round-robin tournament and then have a 4-team playoff. So everything was in order, and newspapers started having contests and giving away tickets and trying to sell tickets. Here's a contest that was in the Montreal Gazette, and it was if you guessed the winner of the tournament, you won 2 tickets on a trip to the home of the National League World Series game. That was whoever won this contest would have seen games in Cincinnati against the Red Sox that year in '75. So, anybody who's seen my presentation before knows that I love my mascots. So, of course, the Intercontinental Cup had a mascot. Welcome to Peppy. He was the mascot for the '75 Intercontinental Cup. Peppy was picked as a write-in contest from youth in the Maritimes and Quebec. And it was an 11-year-old from St. Leonard, northern Montreal, who won the contest. But he was confused because he picked the name Scotty. So the kid who won that contest got 2 tickets to every game. And I was talking to Maxwell last night. Where is he? Maxwell? Oh, they're young. We're talking about it, and it was like, maybe because of Pepe Frias and Pepe Manuel, the Expos, the only two players in history with the name Pepe as to why Pepe was chosen as the name. So, by the way, the kid who won the contest was an 11-year-old kid named Daniel Daoud. I had to check if it was the same Dan Daoud who played for Montreal Canadiens and Toronto Maple Leafs, but it's not. The age just don't line up. It's kind of hoping that that was. So the tournament was happening, the players were picked, plans were in place for the various teams to train all around Montreal, and exhibition games were going to be scheduled across the country, mostly against provincial all-star teams. So all the countries were going to get some games in Canada. The U.S. team was a collection of college all-stars. The Cuban team was a perennial champion in international baseball, as was Japan. So those three teams were expected to be the top three teams. Canada, they were hoping for a fourth place finish. So, in June, Cuba pulls out. It was the 1970s, so much of the communication was done via letters and something called communiques. And there were apparently 35 letters exchanged. The Cuban Federation gave various reasons, and every single one of them for why they weren't going to play. But the most common explanation was that the tournament was too close to the Pan Am Games, which was 2 months later in Mexico City. They also said one of the reasons they gave was that they wished the North Korean Federation was picked to play in the tournament, not South Korea. So the pullout was costly, as Cuba had a lot of games across the country. They were a team that people wanted to see, and so those games had to be canceled. It cost the organizers $30,000. The organizers were scrambling to find a 8th team to come in, and it was decided that Colombia was going to be that team. So, teams are picked, Canada's ready. This is the Canadian team. None of the players did anything beyond a year or two in minor league professional baseball. Most were star amateurs across the country. Fred Cardwell is up there on the right, I think, right on the second line across. He was a star pitcher in Western Canada for many years in the 60s and 70s. You're going to hear about him a bit. Brent Hallett and Kevin Keith were New Brunswick players. John Osborne and Al Payne were well-known Ontario players. There's 4 members of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame here. You see bottom row on the left is John Carr. He was inducted in 2007. Fourth over in the middle on the left is Vernon Hankerhan. He was inducted in 2021, just last year. Wayne Norton, way to the far end next to Fred Cardwell, from the right in the middle. He was 2016, and in addition, Doc Yonker in the bottom right. In 2005, he was inducted in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. After this tournament, he became the trainer for the San Diego Padres for 10 years. So, as expected, there was some controversy in Quebec because there were no Quebec players on the team. That changed a couple weeks before the tournament when a guy named Richard Milo hit over 500 in the Canadian Senior Baseball Championships in BC. So they picked him to be on the team. He actually did pretty well. He got into some games. After the tournament, Richard Milo became a baseball journalist for 40 years in Quebec. He wrote for various sports magazines, the Daily Le Devoir newspaper, and the Canadian Press. Some of the other key players that were in this tournament, the Americans had 7 players who ended up in the majors. So 3 of them Canadian connections. Paul Molitor with Toronto, Ron Passy and Scott Sanderson with the Expos. Bob Farris pitched 7 games for the Angels. Kip Young, Eddie Walling had careers, decent careers, and Jerry Gulliver with the Orioles. Those players all made it. They were obviously the favorites in the tournament. And 7 guys that made the majors. So. Now, Italy had a player named Giorgio Castelli. Everybody know Giorgio Castelli? You keeping up with your 1970s Italian baseball? He was a star. He was a legend. He led the Italian league 8 years in hitting. Hit over 500 in 8 years. In 1968, he was invited to the Cincinnati Reds training camp, and he was expected over the next 5 years, whatever, to be the heir apparent to Johnny Bench. And they were going to move Bench to first and put Giorgio Castelli as their catcher. Joe Gargiulo even called him definitely a major league prospect. So in 1977, he still was invited to the Reds training camp. They offered him a contract, and a big quote, his mother said, no, she doesn't want him to play too far away from Italy. The guy never made it, or never got his major league jersey. But yeah, he was a star. So Canada did all right in this tournament. Here's some players from the team. The city of Moncton embraced the tournament, as did the media. Canada won 3 of the 5 games. We'll talk about those games in a minute. Here is Dennis. That's Dennis Lindstrand from Camrose, Alberta. Bobby Thompson from Brandon, Manitoba. Doug Simon from Regina, Saskatchewan. Here's Wayne Norton talking to Fred Cardwell on the left and catcher Ted Springanatic. Sorry, I can't pronounce his name. These are all pictures from the Moncton Times. Here's after a game against Nicaragua that they did really well. Bob Thompson and Kevin Keith showing off home run balls they hit. And here's Bob Thompson celebrating that home run against Nicaragua. Again, it was the Moncton Times. They did a really good job of covering this tournament. Here's the Nicaragua team. They even profiled some of the other players. On the right is Orlando O'Farrell. He's shown players how to punt on Nicaragua. Now, Orlando O'Farrell played shortstop for the Indian Head team in 1953, and also North Battleford in 1954 and 55 in the Western Canada League. After playing in the Negro Leagues, he also played in the Negro Leagues for the Indianapolis Clowns, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. So here's the round robin games in Moncton. Quickly through the Canadian games. Everybody played 4 or 5 games. All the teams played 4 or 5 games. Canada beat South Korea. Fred Caldwell shook off a line drive off his knee, but stayed in for a complete game, scattering 6 hits. Ted Springanatic of Surrey was the hitting star with a 2-run double in the 7th to get the lead. Game 2, it was pitched against Nicaragua. That was pitched by John Osborne of Toronto. He was a knuckleballer. He gave up 7 hits and another complete game performance. Apparently the defense was stellar, 3 double plays. Kevin Keith of Miramachi and Bob Thompson of Brandon powered the attack each with a homer in the 7th, which we saw earlier in the image. And Dennis Lindstrand had 3 hits. Game 3 of Canada was a game they were expected to win. They were playing Italy, and they lost 1-0. The game was in horrible conditions. It only lasted 6 innings. Fred Caldwell pitched the game. It was called the 6th. Canada had a runner on second, 1 out. The only run in that game was brought in by the Italian catcher, Giorgio Castelli, everybody's favorite Italian player. Game 4 in Moncton brought Canada back to the winning side with an 8-7 victory over Colombia. Again, the same pitchers. John Osborne started, got to the 8th, he had an 8-2 lead, but he kind of ran into some trouble, so Fred Caldwell came in, did all the mop-up, and they won 8-7. He held on to win 8-7. Marty Maxwell and Dennis Lindstrand were the game stars. Game 5 was against the Americans. The dominant team, they were doing really well. It didn't go well. They lost 6-0. The American pitcher was a guy named Steve Lane. He pitched 8 2/3 innings, no hitter, and it was broken up with an infield single by New Brunswick player Brent Howard. So that was it for Moncton. They did pretty well. So let's go to Montreal. This is the final games of the tournament and the playoffs. But before that, so Montreal in those days was kind of an interesting time. It was, also in August, this makes sense. It's kind of an interesting time. There was a lot of strikes going on in the public service. The summer was warm, the Expos bats were cold, there was a lot of young players on the team, they were just getting going. And when the Intercontinental Cup came to town, the Expos were 20 games out, but still drawing decent crowds. They were on the road. The Montreal media, newspapers at least, kind of ignored this tournament, and they just paid attention to the Expos. There was one columnist, named Mike Boone of the Gazette, who wrote about wrote about this tournament and the quirks of international baseball, and he talked about the use of aluminum bats, and designated hitter was an alien concept to Montreal fans, so he talked about that. So other than printing the scores, the French newspapers kind of ignored the tournament. The English newspapers really didn't talk too much about it. But there was a quirky little TV station that just started called TVSQ. It was on the South Shore of Montreal. I lived in the west end of Montreal, and I had one of those, I meant to put a picture of one of those weird little cable boxes that had 3 lines across. And you could get this channel, and you can see right there, they showed the games. And that's what, but TVSQ was the network. And I loved it because I was 12 years old at the time. And during the day, I could go to a doubleheader, see 2 games, and the afternoons, and it cost me whatever it was, $3 or $4, whatever it was. And then at night I'd come home and watch myself on TV. It's the first time I was on TV. And so you could watch these games. That channel was famous because before that, there was a scandal in Quebec called the Tainted Meat Scandal, and that channel showed all the inquiry into that. And now they're showing baseball games from your international baseball tournament in Quebec. For years, we've been trying to find footage of these games. Just about a month ago, I worked in the television business, and about a month ago, I was in France, and I was meeting with a guy from Quebec, and I told him the story of TBSQ, and he goes, "That was my first job." And I said, "Is that footage still there?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "I don't know if there's any archives or anything," but he goes, "I remember that." And I'm like, "Oh." So, anyways, he's looking for it. He's trying to help me find this footage. So, the original title of this talk was supposed to be the Intercontinental Cup, and the first time I was ever on television. But so, games are in Montreal, Jerry Park. Expos start off pretty good. Canada starts off pretty good against Puerto Rico. They win 8-0. Again, Fred Cargill, which is amazing. 5-hitter. Then they lose to Japan. They lose 8-1. I remember that game quite well. Very disappointing. So in the round robin, they end up in third. And like it was a reference earlier to the Can-Am League, they did a first and third versus second and fourth playoff. And what they did, they lose to the United States 7-5. It's a good game. Japan wins. And in the bronze medal game, it was expected Canada was going to finish third, as the expectation was. They were doing great, but Pedro Silva of Nicaragua hit a 9th-inning home run to win the game. So that was it. The United States won 8-0. Bob Ferris was the winning pitcher, and there were big hits from Paul Molitor and Ron Hassey had big games. So that's the end of the tournament. It was kind of not many people went to the games. The Jerry Park games were in the high hundreds and low thousands. Like there was no imagination thought for that tournament in Montreal. So that's pretty much it. There wasn't much of a legacy in Montreal. In Moncton, they got an upgraded stadium. After the tournament ended, the two competing organizations in international baseball merged, creating the International Amateur Baseball Association. The Intercontinental Cup retained its status, but again, the media didn't really help it catch the imaginations of baseball fans in Montreal or Canada, really. It was disappointing that Canada didn't win a first ever medal in an international baseball tournament. That was kind of expected. After the 75 Cup, it kept going, the Intercontinental Cup, until 2010. In 81 and 85, it was held in Edmonton, so it did come back to Canada. But they pretty much stopped the tournament in 2010 to focus on the World Baseball Classic. And that's the story. Any questions? Oh, okay, yeah, hi.
Hi, Warren. You mentioned the Team USA players to reach the major leagues.
Yeah.
Did any of the players from any of the other teams reach the majors?
No, and the MVP of the tournament, I can't pronounce his name, was a Japanese player. He hit really well, but no other player.
Hanrahan was in AAA.
Yeah, like guys made it to professional baseball, but none of them got to
And
major
Wade Norton played.
Right, but none of them got to major leagues, yeah. But he was a coach. Those guys were coaches.
Oh, and yeah, because he would have been,
Right.
yeah, he pitched.
So none of the players on the other teams made it. The closest was that
Coaches
Italian
should have
catcher.
played.
The Italian catcher almost made it. But his mother.
Yeah. Any of the Japanese players into the Japanese leagues?
Oh yeah, well, sorry, I don't. Yeah, the answer is yes. It was called the Amateur Championship of the World. So I don't. You're right. I'm sure they did. They were a really good team. Yeah.
I was actually at that gold medal match game.
Right on. So was I.
And there was hardly anyone there.
I know. Yeah. I know you. I remember you.
He got your foul ball.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're the one that went green.
My biggest memory of that was the an American player, after the game was over, running back to the dugout and getting a camera and taking a picture of the scoreboard.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember him doing that, taking pictures of, like in those days, it was all film camera. You know, take pictures of just people cheering, and then he went up and took a couple pictures of the scoreboard. That's my only memory of that.
Wow.
You said they held the tournament in Nicaragua? Did I remember? Or?
No, the first one was in Italy, the second one was in Canada. Subsequent years, I don't memorize, but
okay.
it probably, I mean, it might have. but
It
went
went
till-
to 20.
It went for every 2 years till 2010. So. Anybody else want to know anything about 70 Montreal? You? Hi.
How was it promoted? How did you know about it? Were there
Because I was
newspaper ads
a
on
baseball
radio?
fan and I read the newspaper every day and I probably saw that ad for the tickets and it was just, you know, it was just, I knew everything about baseball, so I tried to know everything. So it was, you know, it wasn't many distractions then other than the daily newspaper. So I remember they were trying to get a radio contract, they didn't.
Warren, I believe you're still involved in the TV.
Nope, that's not true. That's a rumor that you started. Yes. Andrew wanted me to mention this, and it ties into the Italian. So I'm doing the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. I've been a producer for television and I've done a lot of things, but I've produced TV shows. In fact, I did a presentation for the second year of this conference about Claire Atkins, a doctor, about a baseball player. Next month, in January, I'm launching a television network, because that's what people do, right? It'll be free, it'll be on 1.4 billion televisions around the world, it'll be a sports channel. And I've pretty much secured the rights, the professional Italian baseball league, 650 games, baseball and softball, so it's every game played in Italy. Parma and Bologna is a big rivalry. There's several major leaguers who have played in that league. It's one of the best baseball leagues in Europe. The game of blind baseball was invented in Italy. And they won the first ever blind baseball world championships. I'll be doing a documentary on that. And so, yeah, that's part of it. And the other thing, have you guys heard of this new league in Dubai called Baseball United? Anybody know anything about this? Wow. Okay, so Mariano Rivera and Barry Larkin have started a baseball league. The game is going to be played in Dubai next fall. It'll be a 4-team tournament, and it'll be players from that region, from India, Pakistan, wherever else. There'll be 4 teams. And there was press conferences a couple months ago, and I know they had another one this week, and Mariano Rivera and Barry Larkin have taken ownership of this league over. And I'm negotiating for TV rights to this league, and I'll have the worldwide TV rights, so I don't have it yet, so I can't go, don't write that kind of so yeah, but it'll be players from that region. A friend of mine in Toronto was actually the coach of the Moncton team. So I'm still hoping to be involved in baseball and do some sort of television somewhere along the way.
Great.
Yeah. Any questions? Spaghetti lobster.